Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler Selhorn, and welcome to another episode of Speak Easy, the podcast where we discuss communication, productivity systems, capturing our thoughts, and how we share those thoughts with our future selves and others. Managing our brains is core to 21st century work, and we're here to learn how to do it better than we did yesterday. Thanks so much for listening. Speak Easy is brought to you by Cleft, the easiest way to collect your thoughts. With our cross-platform applications, you can simply capture your ideas wherever you are and paste them where they belong later. Today, we are blessed to be learning out loud with Ali Greene. Ali is the co-author of Remote Works, Managing for Freedom, Flexibility, and Focus from Barrett Kohler. Ali's mission is to empower people and companies, helping them thrive by making work-life better. Ali has been named a top 50 remote accelerator by remote.com, a top remote work influencer in the United States by Virtual MQ, and a must-follow remote work expert by Gusto. Ali, we're curious, how can we improve our work lives by improving our documentation? Seriously, improving our lives with documentation?
Heyo, thanks so much for having me. And
You're welcome.
I think most people hear documentation and their eyes glaze over, and that's not a good start to something that is so empowering for so many reasons. And so making documentation something people actually care about, I think, is the next level of giving people flexibility. And what I mean by that, to break it down, is if you're able to document in a clear and concise way for yourself and for others, whether it be a team, a company, clients, etc., then you're sharing information and passing knowledge along in a way that gets systemized, which means that you can be more asynchronous, which means that you have more autonomy over how you're spending your energy and your time in your holistic life, and how you're prioritizing things, which order of operations you go to get things done. And you're removing all of this noise of what was the answer, what did we agree on, what are the next steps, by having a clear place to go and remember all those decisions. So they're out of your head and into the cloud. And in doing all of that, you get more choice in how you structure your life, which includes work. And therefore, documentation is the key to making work and life better, because it's the key to unlock having choice, having autonomy, having flexibility, and making decisions that suit your values.
Ali, I love the way you started things off for us, right? We're talking about empowering individuals. And of course, here at Cleft, we are huge fans of this phrase. I'm definitely going to be repeating it in the future. Out of your head and into the cloud. Emphatically, yes, right? And in ways that are easily accessible to people, that, asynchronously and autonomously, in ways that serve them and not just the organization, but in that holistic way that you're talking about. Okay, so let's pull on some of those threads there, Ali. When you talk about documentation being empowering, right? And the first thing that you said was flexibility. Mm-hmm. What does it mean for documentation to be empowering flexibility for others?
Yeah, so what I mean by that is the more you can lean into documentation culture, the more asynchronous time you have to learn new things, to make decisions, to share knowledge, and to manage projects. I would say are the big four categories of all of this. If you want to see it from a different lens, the easiest way to explain this is actually to explain in the opposite. A world without documentation means the following. Likely you're having a lot more meetings that need to be scheduled across different time zones and throughout a day that might not be the best and most optimal time for you to be sitting in front of your computer screen or commuting to an office to talk to other folks. Without documentation, it means that you need to remember what was said in a meeting last week and what the next steps are. And likely maybe you're having a meeting about the meeting because you and all of the other stakeholders do not see eye to eye on what the conclusions were. Without documentation, you need to ping people and stop your workflow if you hit a roadblock because you need a question answered and there's not a central place to go for it. And so you're stopping your workflow, interrupting someone else's workflow to get a piece of information that's the missing puzzle piece of getting your job done. And all of those things are pretty inconvenient, terrible, frustrating. And so I think to highlight the importance of documentation, the best way to do it is to explain a world without great documentation. And you see how confined you are to these constraints of work when you don't have this thing in place that helps you get into flow, work when you feel most motivated, respect other people's schedules and not interrupt them, and all of those benefits.
I love this invitation to avoid the misery of meetings, memorization, misalignment, and misunderstandings. I am a sucker
I
for
like the
some
alliteration.
for some alliteration. Exactly.
Yeah, me too.
So I will be taking. We got the nuggets here, Ali. Really appreciating you inviting us into the empowerment of documentation, enabling flexibility. I guess maybe you mentioned autonomy off the top, autonomous life, and even like values-based individual decision-making. I guess maybe like that's kind of a far leap for me. So let's take us on the journey of starting with good documentation, then ending with autonomous, life-giving, value-based work lives.
Yeah, of course. So with all of the alliteration we just shared, I think all of these are key pieces that you need to have autonomy in your work, and therefore be able to detach yourself a little bit more from the constraints of work and lean more into your life. And so what documentation really allows is to gain alignment. Then if you have alignment, you can work autonomously because you know that there's clear goals that you're working towards with you and the other stakeholders. With good documentation, you have the information you need, whether it be explaining the process you should follow to complete a certain activity at work, whether it be having a template that makes the communication easy to digest by all of the stakeholders, whether it be having the answers to questions that commonly get asked when you're in a position to do something, or reminding yourself of information or past thoughts or past work that you have done. Having all of those things easily available at your fingertips means that when you're ready to work, you can use those resources all at the same time. And the opposite of that is asking for help and asking for information, which means you're stopping the work you're doing and waiting for someone else's response. And so you're not autonomous anymore because you're reliant on somebody getting back to you with information that should be readily available to stakeholders in a project. If you're no longer reliant on someone else giving you information that you need to do your job, if you're no longer stuck because there's a fear that there might be misalignment in the true goals or expectations of a project, that means you now have autonomy to be able to work on that project. And taking that leap means, for me, if you have ownership and accountability and autonomy in the project, you can choose how it gets done using the process and templates made available to you, where it gets done, which is a lot of the phenomena of remote work in the past 4 or 5 years. But it also means, and I think this is something that is the new pinnacle of just true work-life balance in a way, is having time flexibility and choosing when it gets done. And so the connection there is, if you're choosing when to work, you're also choosing when the other top priorities in your life are being scheduled. So that's where values come in. For me, one of my top values in my life is living a life where I feel connected to nature. And being connected to nature and working in tech pretty much my whole career, you would think, well, Ali, that's not really a good match. But because of autonomous work that's provided via documentation, I'm able to plan ahead and say, actually, I'm going to take a tech-free Thursday, Friday in order to be able to go hiking and camping, which is something that I just did last week. And I know that if people need anything from me, they have the resources of the thoughts in my head, of the active projects I'm working on, that they don't actually need me in the present moment. They need the content that I created, the processes, the notes, etc. And so I know the work can continue without my real-time presence being a roadblock, and still contributing and being able to live my value of putting nature first and scheduling that. For other people, that might look like spending time with their kids and making sure that their most important appointments in their calendar are things like school plays or soccer practice, and then meetings from work come after that, because less meetings are needed when you have good documentation. For others, it might mean that they can go to the yoga class that they really love and they can schedule that first. And so I think it's an order of operations on how you prioritize the things that align to your personal values and figuring out where work fits into that.
I just want to celebrate leaders like Ali and others that we are connected to that are building businesses and the documentation that enables those kinds of lives where you mentioned going to a sports event for a child. We're celebrating the eighth graders that are there. One of our sons is a captain. We have twin boys. And one was a captain for their eighth grade football team for their first home game, and all that. And there wasn't any part of my day that was interrupted. My work life, my personal life, it was all integrated, right? And I just appreciate you demonstrating and showing us that that is possible. I guess maybe I want to start even before the documentation exists, right?
Yeah.
And you've got these thoughts, right? We've got to get them out of our head and into the cloud, as you've said. Where do you work? Let's zoom all the way into Ali, right? And she's building this documentation that is going to create this aligned business and personal lives that were happening because of documentation. I'm also an example of this being true, right? It's possible to build businesses that don't depend on the sun being on your side of the world, working with teammates that live 12 time zones away. It's possible. It's being done. I'm a believer. But how do we get to the point where we get it out of our heads and capture those thoughts and write them down and get them into a documentation system? Let's start from the beginning. How do we get to that point just individually?
Yeah. So I'd say the first step, and some of these answers, this is my kind of warning sign, is that I'm a very tool agnostic person. And so
Okay.
I'm going to talk more in answering this question about the methodologies.
Okay, we can zoom out and zoom in at the same time, Ali. Happy to be tool agnostic for sure.
And then I can share some of the tools that I've used in the past. But for me, it's about the steps that you take, the action, not necessarily where that action's being taken, which I consider to be the tool. So first, I think it's important for everybody to learn about themselves. In what situations am I best at getting the thoughts out of my head? And what does that process look like for me? Sometimes for me, that's writing a very old school bullet point list on a piece of scrap paper with a pen. I like to draw a lot of diagrams and pictures and figure out the thoughts in my head through kind of creating workflows that are a bit technically challenged if I'm trying to do it in a very nice way using some sort of tool or interface. So for me, it's diagrams on paper is my first starting point. There's also times, and I think this is funny, especially as it relates to tools like Cleft, where sometimes for me, I learned about myself that I just need to talk to get it out of my head. There's a lot of people that say, oh, if you have a journal by your bed and you wake up in the middle of the night, you can write it down. That's never been me. I need to get it out verbally. But a lot of people don't consume information verbally. And so it's nice to be able to talk and get stuff out of my head and be messy with my sentences and then see it written down and deal with how to present that information to other people later, because I don't necessarily want to expect people to listen to audio notes from me or watch recordings. And this is actually quite an important part of the book writing process. In fact, for me and Tam, we would spend time mostly on Zoom, sometimes on WhatsApp chat, just talking about the state of remote work, what worked well for us, what we wish we knew when we were younger, and getting it out of my head just through a conversation, and then seeing the transcript of that conversation later and being hey, actually this kind of makes sense, and this is a good starting point for chapter 5. It was a really empowering way to feel progress and productivity was happening just through chatting. As someone who can be very chatty, that works for me.
Hi, guilty. I'm a podcaster. I think out loud. We're celebrating learning out loud with you today, Ali. That's obviously what we're trying to build here at Cleft.
So I think you need to find what works for you. Sometimes for me, it's pictures and bullet points. Sometimes it's long monologues. Figure it out and know that your way is your way. I think there's a lot of pressure and advice that exists in the world, especially around things like documentation, communication, and productivity, that there's like a best practice that exists. And I disagree with that. I think the best practice is what works for you. And if you are someone who can, write notes on their phone just while they're out and about, great. But you need to figure out the first messy way. So I always start with the mess and then I clean it up. And so after I get things out of my head, for me, I really like structure and I really like to organize things, including information. And so my second process after I've released all the messy thoughts is to go back to them and say, how can I make these thoughts tangible for other people and for the stakeholders that this project is related to? And that's usually where I then identify the tool that makes the most sense. So being tool agnostic, I still think through like, is this a project where I'm already collaborating with folks using Asana, for example, or I use Joplin to organize a lot of my like personal life projects, which is a tool that's quite interesting. And sometimes it's just a Word document or something similar. And I have specific headlines that I always use, whether it's work related or personal related, of what is this thought about? Who's it useful for? What is the context? What are important links that I don't want to forget about that I can just put here because I don't like organizing bookmarks personally? And then like, where is my working area? And this can be really messy. And then above it, how do I have it cleaned up and have the TLDR, the headlines, the bullet points for other people? And so that's a process of thinking that I always go through when I'm communicating or documenting information. And the end result, despite the tool, is usually similar. It's what is the most important thing? What is the context? Where are the details if people want it? But I don't start there. That's my cleaning up process.
I I'm hesitating here in my reply because I'm hearing so much rhyming with my own experiences. The way I've expressed it before is you said the messy, the first messy way, right? You talked about thinking out loud along with Tam and like turning that into something useful. The thing that I'm most excited about when I am using Cleft, it kind of shrinks this space that's at the beginning of my process, right? Is to use a voice draft and then a first draft. And I would say that it used to take me a lot longer before Cleft to get to that first draft that I can then share with somebody else,
Yeah.
right? And that's almost instantaneous, right? We've got some new features right now where it just automatically copies whatever it is that you created with your voice. And that's what I like to do is it doesn't need to stay in Cleft for me. It gets to where it needs to be pasted right away. And so then you take that first draft and you get somebody to revise it with you. And then it's time for a published draft. And I think it's interesting to hear you saying, I come back to it, right? It's something that I return to. It's something that gets matured over time. And it might, have different endpoints inside of whatever tool happens to be the thing. But it always ends up in this kind of similar fashion where there is the top line must understand like bullet or set of bullets, right? With context underneath and then details. I think that's so interesting to hear our brains rhyming in that way. I guess maybe I'm curious to learn more about how you think about your mind and how you think about your brain. That's something that we're kind of, thinking about as we're building Cleft because our founders are neurodivergent. I'm an unidentified attention deficit person. I definitely flit around and have lots of things happening all at once. And I guess maybe I'm curious to learn more about you and like how you think about your mind and think about your brain inside of this space. It's not just, okay, let's get it down on the piece of paper, but like even further back to the layer zero of like, how does your brain work? How do you think about managing that well?
Yeah, I really like this question. And I don't know if it's something I've thought about in that exact way, but I'm now, as you're asking me that question, reminded of times where I've really questioned the way that I approach projects and therefore the way I approach thinking and correlating it back to like core values of life.
Mm-hmm.
And something I've learned about myself because of remote work and given the freedom to explore how I work is that I have a very strong value also. So now everyone's also learning a lot of my personal values in this podcast. So nature. And the next one is novelty. Like I
Mm.
really am the type of person that seeks out new experiences, fun, um, just getting energy from the world and bringing it into my life. And how that relates to work and how that relates to how I think is that I've noticed about myself when I try to do work as we've learned it, which means sitting at a desk in a quiet environment, being quote unquote serious, my thoughts overwhelm me. And they're just ping ponging across different themes of the work that I'm doing. They're really loud, and it's hard for me to express the mess and it's hard for me to clean it up because I'm feeling almost like stuck in those thoughts. But it's what I'm supposed to be doing because I'm at a desk and I'm being serious. And that's always something early in my career that I really struggled with. And I didn't know how to really confine that. And then people that have known me for a while talking about productivity or read the book might know about me that I have this hack I like, which is one place, one goal. And this is something that I sort of like learned by happy accident through remote work, where I realized if I was making work the fun activity, I could streamline my thoughts to the goal that had to get done. And so what I do now is I like to go to a very specific place and I anchor myself in location, which is funny to say as a remote worker. And in that location, I know that there's an important job to be done. And for me, somehow that signals to my brain, my body, I don't know, that it is time to work on this subject. And this is something you were excited about and interested about and motivated about. And now's the time to get it done. And so, in changing those environments and anchoring myself to environments, I'm able to streamline my thoughts and then get them out of my system into the cloud. And then I can start getting to work. And so, examples of that is I will go to certain cafes when I want to do more creative work or when I want to put together proposals or when I want to organize things. If I'm not somewhere where I'm traveling and I'm out in different cafes or locations like that, even within my own home, I have a home office and I'm sitting at this desk right now talking to you. I only ever sit at this desk to do synchronous calls, even though it's probably the most traditionally productive place in my home. But for me, this signals a place to explore via talking. And so when I try to come here to do quiet work, it doesn't happen for me. I need to go into my dining room and sit at that table in order to like go through admin tasks or to like lay out all of my papers and organize the messy drawings that I've done and put them into a streamlined process. So for me, to sum all this long kind of points of the conversation up, I've noticed that I had to find actions that align to my values that allowed me to streamline my thoughts and harness the power of the thoughts rooted deeply in location as a flexible worker and someone who wants to then take advantage of different locations for different types of thinking.
I love that you circled back to, you mentioned nature and novelty, right? As being like these ways that you unlock your brain's function, right? And maybe a listener out there is, oh yeah, you know what? When I go to a different spot, it's better for my brain, right?
Yeah.
I guess maybe this is a fun, like Ali and Tyler know each other before this podcast moment here, but I've seen you share on social media before that you build blanket forts with your laptop. I'm wondering what kind of work happens when you're in a blanket fort.
Yeah. Really creative, exciting work that like I can't, you know, the feeling, and hopefully people know this feeling because this is the part of work we don't shine enough light on. When you wake up in the morning and you're really tired, but you have this idea and you can't not take action on that idea. Um, if you have that often, I applaud you and you're like doing the right thing in your professional life. And if you don't have that feeling often, that's okay. But I hope you get to experience it, even if it's for a personal project. But for me, like when I have those thoughts of like, don't even want to like necessarily get up and like brush my hair. Like I have to start working on this before the thought escapes me. That is like blanket fort time. That is like, I'm going to the sofa, I'm getting cozy, and I'm getting down to creative work.
Well, I can't think of a better conclusion to our conversation than utilizing blanket forts to unlock creativity. And we invite everyone to be thinking about how to, manage their brains and capture their thoughts and, get those ideas out of your head and into the cloud, where you and others can access later. Thank you so much for learning out loud with us today, Ali. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Tyler.
The Speak Easy podcast is brought to you by Cleft, the easiest way to collect your thoughts. With our cross-platform applications, you can simply capture your ideas wherever you are and paste them where they belong later. Check us out at cleftnotes.com. That's CLEFTNOTES.com. Thanks for listening as we think aloud together.